Welcome back to Special Educators Resource Room. I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. I'm so glad that you're tuning in. This might be my favorite episode ever because I love this topic. I love teaching in small groups. It is one of my favorite things. I feel like it's where the magic happens. It's one of the reasons I love independent work systems so much because they create the opportunity to pull small groups. If you don't share my love, that's okay. I will try to keep my enthusiasm under control, and I still think these teaching hacks that I'll be sharing can be helpful throughout the school day. And if you don't mind, I'm going to skip the intro music this week so that there's more time to share. Let's start with a quick reflection. How are your small groups going? Have you ever felt like your small groups are just dragging? Like you are doing all the talking and your students are tuning out, or maybe it's just the opposite and you can't get a word in edgewise. I have been there many times. I love small groups, but I also know it can be very easy to fall into the same routine every day. And before you know it, the energy just disappears. So we're going to be talking about some very simple ways to shake things up, keep your small groups engaging, yet also structured. And we're going to try to do this without overstimulating everyone. Before we talk about the solutions, let's troubleshoot the problem. Because if your small groups are feeling a little lifeless, I promise it's not just you. Maybe your students are just going through the motions. Maybe they're answering questions, but not really engaging. Or maybe it feels like you are the only one doing the talking, or your groups are feeling chaotic and students are getting off track, losing focus, and needing constant redirection. Here's what I've realized over the years. Groups often get off track and lose their energy when they lose their structure. And I know that sounds backward because structure usually sounds pretty boring, right? But no, the more predictable and streamlined your small groups are, the more room there is for real engagement. So let's start with structure. Because a lot of times small groups can feel messy simply because students don't know what to expect. And the easiest way to fix that is a clear beginning, middle, and end. The beginning is a great time to have a routine that's going to set the tone. Every small group should start the same way so students can feel comfortable and ready to learn. I like to always share the agenda, so I'd just grab a small whiteboard next to me and I'd write a simple list of what we were going to do. Warm up, new skill, game, wrap up. And here's where visuals can make a big difference. My students were often non-readers, so this just looked like me pointing and listing it off. When students can see and hear the plan, they're going to be more focused. Instead of waiting on me to get everything set up, my students also knew to grab their warm-up activity while I got everyone settled in. This was so helpful if somebody was struggling with a transition. My students were getting to work. So I might have had a basket of decodable books, or maybe a stack of task boxes, or some fluency pages. My students knew what to expect. Now let's talk about the middle, keeping the lesson content engaging and interactive. My trick was always to use pre-prepared dry erase insert pages. I kept a stack of double-sided templates so we could always be ready for anything. No reinventing the wheel over here. We had writing lines, number bonds, sentence starters on these dry erase pages. It made transitions from one activity to the next seamless because we would just flip over the dry erase page. We didn't have to fumble for new materials. No idle time. Now we've reached the end of the lesson, and I highly recommend ending the lesson with intention. You don't want to just say, all right, we're done. What worked best for us was planning about 30 seconds per student. Maybe they did a turn and talk, or they shared something with the small group. And if you can't imagine your students participating, or if that's just not appropriate, it could be a group activity like tap the table if your name has 3 syllables. It was something in place to signal the end of that small group and the beginning of the next activity or the transition. Once the small group structure has been re-established, let's look at some other things we can do to spice up our small groups without overstimulating everyone. I'm going to list out some small but powerful ways you can energize your small groups. Of course, don't try to do all of these at the same time, but as you're listening, maybe one or two will resonate. Number 1, changing the seating or setup. letting students sit on the floor, use flexible seating, or even stand for some variation. And if that's not possible, what about just changing the setup, using color-coded folders or small bins for an element of novelty? Same lesson resources, just set up in a different way. Number 2, add a quick game without derailing the lesson. So this doesn't mean pulling out a brand new game. Maybe it's just adding dice or a spinner or some flashcards. For example, roll a 3, read 3 words. Roll a 5, build a sentence. Number 3, try rotating roles. Can students take turns being the teacher for part of the lesson? For example, one student's going to call out words and another student's going to give feedback. Number 4, infuse movement, but keep it focused. Instead of sitting the whole time, could you add simple, purposeful movement? Tap the table when you find a rhyming word. Stand up if you solve the math problem correctly. Pass a card around and only answer when it lands on you. Let's pause and check in real quick. Are you getting any ideas? All right, let's keep going. Number 5, increase student talk time. If you feel like you're doing most of the talking, students might be tuning out. So you could try partner talk, choral responses, or turn and talk moments to keep them involved. And number 6, use sound and music strategically. You could use music to signal transitions or use call and response attention getters to refocus energy without raising your voice. Those 6 ideas were pretty easy. If you try them out and they work, great. If you try them out and they flop, no huge loss. They're not really going to mess up the routine too much. But this next list might. So take this with a grain of salt. This is what I'm going to refer to as the post-spring break survival mode. And yes, I have done all of these. The first idea is to plan some sort of surprise activity. Now, I'm not talking about spending money or transforming your classroom. I don't know about you, but that would have been a disaster for students I worked with, very overstimulating. What I'm thinking about is just some type of surprise. Maybe all of your independent work or your read alouds or your small group activities are all based on a surprise theme that your students are just not expecting. So the structure can stay the same, but the theme is the surprise. So my quick story, I think I might have shared this before. I had a student obsessed with tornadoes, specifically the tornado scene from Wizard of Oz. And he had made tremendous progress and everybody knew it. We had a tight community and students were cheering each other on. It was a lovely, lovely school year. And I wanted to surprise the student. It was his birthday. And my students walked into their small group and every activity they did had something to do with a tornado. So I had tornado task boxes. We had a tornado read aloud. Some of it was nonfiction. Some of it was literature. And the big surprise was I had queued up the tornado scene that we were able to watch at the very end. That's what I mean by surprise. It didn't cost me anything. But that child is probably going to remember it. I think all of us are going to remember those tornadoes for a long time. This next idea might not be for everyone, but hopefully you could figure out a way to do it. Take learning on the road. Can you take learning somewhere else than those same 4 walls? So I know when the weather gets nice and our rooms get really hot and stuffy, I would love to take learning outside. I remember one day teaching place value using sticks while we sat under a shade tree. And what I don't remember is having any behavior disruption during that lesson outside. This next idea is always worth trying out at least once, especially if you use dry erase markers at any time during your day. Have your students write directly on the small group table. So skip the whiteboards. They love it. And you will get so much more done. You might want to consider washi tape or just masking tape on the table to mark boundaries for each student or not, just see how it goes. But I promise you the engagement will not be an issue. This last tip is pretty embarrassing. I can't believe I did this, but it worked. I had my students create their own task boxes. How is that for the most lazy teacher? But I did it and they loved it. I set out the boxes. I set out index cards, pencils, markers. I think I had stickers, and then I had hands-on manipulatives. And I had my students work through the process of creating their own task box. And they loved it. It was such a hit. And they worked on it all week, Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, they could have students try out their task box. They presented it to the group or gave it to a student, switched out, and they had to do each other's tasks. So much fun, and no one lost it. I hope that you realized as I was explaining these activities, none of these things cost money. I wasn't asking you to purchase anything. There were no sugary snacks, wasn't huge amounts of your time. It was just switching things up while still preserving structure, because we do know our students need that. We need it too. Here's my challenge for you. This week, try one of these strategies in your small groups. See what works, tweak it for your students, and let me know how it goes. If you're looking for more structured independent work ideas, check out the Complete Independent Work Club. I'll put a link in the show notes. I will also put a link to my pack of dry erase page inserts. These are my go-to pages for K through 2, both the inclusion setting and the resource room, and it includes differentiated literacy and differentiated math. No need to reinvent the wheel. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I can't wait to hear how your small groups go. I'll catch you next time in the Special Educators Resource Room.
Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe buttons so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.